Good evening, everybody. My name is Peter Steeves, and it's my privilege to be the director of the DePaul Humanities Center. I'm pleased to welcome you to Letter to a Future Book and Reader with our very special guest, Andrew Monson. Tonight, we're interested in thinking together about the nature of the library book, and that, of course, means we must talk about both what it means to be a book and what it means to be a library. And this, in turn, means investigating what it means to be a reader and to be an archivist. In some important sense, both the book and the library are collections, thoughtful assemblies of things that are similar but different, put together and reflecting their creator's current value system, but also attempting to speak to the future. The author of the book and the curator of an archive make creative choices about these assemblies of things: words, thoughts, ideas, tomes. Their work necessarily has a history to it, but is always a reaching out to the future. There's a strange modernist conception of the author as a singular subject, a self-made god creating something from nothing, pulling ideas like wisps of angel hair from the ether. True, the author puts down words and ideas. These words and ideas, however, are necessarily echoes of the past. Every word an author uses is a word that the author has learned at some time in her past, a word she has come to add to her lexicon at some particular point in time. That word has a history. It means what it has meant. It means all of the things that past utterances and scribblings of it have ever meant. The author writes the word, and it is, in some real sense, an echo of the first usage of that word. The word brings with it all of its historical meaning, and it gains new meaning by means of its new usage. In this way, the word is an archive. Should I today say or write the word family, or loins, or firing, or frisbee, these words have meaning because others have said them and written them down in the past. These words are little containers of history, archives marking what has been done with them previously, each carrying with it an invisible library card on which the stamps of dates and times and circumstances of past checkouts are secretly, hermeneutically recorded. And the author, too, acts like an archivist of a higher level, choosing which words to save, which words go here and there, which orders might have an interesting meaning. She creates a book, an archive of words, which is to say, an archive of an archive. A dictionary, too, echoes, but it holds on to words the way a hoarder might hold on to things. Everything, all piled up, so much presence, so little absence. Absence is important in an archive. What's missing goes on to constitute the meaning of what's present. One can read a dictionary like a novel, but it's difficult. Also, there's little suspense. Spoiler alert, in the end, Zimmergy did it. But, more than this, the order of the book, that is, the method one uses to archive, is itself part of the meaning of that book. A library, then, is a meta-archive, an archive of an archive of an archive. And though archives are constituted by moments from the past, they exist, as someone once said in the past, for the future. They're an attempt to put energy in and hold entropy at bay, at least for a little while, until some future reader shows up. And what that future reader will read is not the book that we've archived there, but rather a future book, because simply by sitting in the archive, the book will change over time. Sometimes it will change physically. It will get defaced, highlighted, notated, enriched with marginalia, scribbled, doodled, torn, and written in. It will have new pages appear, new ideas materializing. But even when a library book is not a medium for additional writing, it will still be born anew when picked up by a future reader, because this is what words and ideas do. This is what all things that exist in time do. They change. Moby Dick means something different in a world where the Twilight novels also exist next to it on the shelf. Personally, I would argue that the Twilight novels make Moby Dick somewhat of a better novel, because we can say, wow, I always knew Moby Dick was pretty good, but look how great it is compared to those Twilight novels. There's a lot of truth in that. But the books change their meaning over time in other ways too. Hamlet is a different play for me now than when I read it as a teenager. It means something different. It's not just that I'm different, it is different. Hamlet has changed because what Hamlet is a set of meanings that is constructed in the act of reading. It's a future book to a future reader, always becoming, always racing away, always just out of grasp. Every single book, one block away from this room in the DePaul Richardson Library, is changing right now as we speak. Imagine at this very moment, each and every book in the library, writing and rewriting itself furiously, the pages a blur on the stacks if we could only see them from here. We take a book down from the shelf, as we will do later tonight when we go over to the library together as a group. And like a quantum superposition collapsing, the book comes to rest in our hands and we cannot see the blur, see the words shifting, see the book changing and settling down. It looks like it's set in stone and always has been. But squint, it's still changing. Tonight is a night that will change everything. I want to begin our evening together with something of an opening act. We're very lucky to have with us Jessica Spear, a research specialist at DePaul Social Science Research Center. Jessica is a librarian, an artist, and a self-proclaimed relaxing lady. Her work, including field recordings, puppet shows, collection of items, and zines, touches on questions of leisure, community, history, mortality, and archival practices. Jessica is not only an expert in library and information science, but she's a driving force for interdisciplinary work and research at DePaul. Her energy, creativity, and intellect have helped bring faculty, staff, and students together in countless ways over the last several years, like bees cross-pollinating each other's honeyed archives. And I'm really pleased that she's agreed to start things off tonight for us in earnest, with her thoughts on what a library, what an archive truly is. And it pleases me even more that she's agreed to present her thoughts using the medium that I believe all truly ambitious, intellectually scholarly endeavors should adopt: homemade, shoestring budget puppetry. Please join me in welcoming, with her assistant Danielle Meyer, Jessica Spear. Is Death Your Friend? A play in 3 acts. Starring an archivist and death. Act 1. What is an archive?
My favorite librarian, Suzanne Grier, said that an antelope can sometimes be considered a document, specifically when it's in a zoo, standing as an example of something. According to her, anything you purposefully catalog and organize as an example of a thing is a document. When you think about it this way, your silverware drawer can be an archive. It's categorized by type, after all.
So, according to her, anything can be a document?
Well, no, but almost anything could be, depending on what you do with it. A star isn't a document, but a photograph of a star is.
I don't know. Isn't that a false distinction? If we're talking about documents as items that stand as evidence of human activity, isn't a landfill a pretty great archive? They're finding all sorts of great things, like alternative histories of Jesus in there. You know, they say he has a wife now.
But a landfill isn't organized. It's not cataloged. It is not preserved.
Well, that's a really fine line you're drawing there. The only thing you purposefully collect and organize count is who's making that call. It excludes the marginalized voices and institutionalizes inherent cultural biases.
But you have to make a choice. That's what differentiates archivists from porters. Just saving doesn't take any thought. It's actually careless. But making a decision about keeping or not keeping gives the collection meaning. Of course it's not perfect. Of course some things will be lost. But we're going to get some things wrong, and people in the future might judge us for that. But it's a limitation we have to live with.
Well, the difference between archivists and hoarders is less interesting than the similarities, but that's a whole other topic.
Act 2, why is an archive?
Okay, really, what is the similarity between an archivist and a hoarder?
Well, as an archivist, I'm sure you're familiar with the term muniments.
Of course, it's an archive of documents, usually related to property rights. It's mostly a legal term, though, used as a defense of those property rights.
Right. But its first usage in English was in a translation from Virgil, referring to other kinds of defenses like an eagle's talons, or bear claws, or rhino horns. The Latin origin is munimentum, which means defense or fortification. The muniment as an archive is a defensive implement against attacks.
Yes, but that's a specific kind of archive.
It is, but I think most archival activities, especially preservation, are also defensive. Your favorite librarian said that documents stand as evidence of human activity, right? And preserving that evidence, carrying it forward, is defensive against oblivion.
I suppose that's one way of thinking about it. But I prefer to think of Diane Arbus's rationale for her photography. She said, I want to preserve the considerable ceremonies of our presence, gather them like somebody's grandmother putting up preserves, because they will have been so beautiful. It's about keeping things from our culture now for the future, for posterity, so our grandchildren and beyond can study and understand us here and now.
Will have been, but they are now. Arbus is feeling nostalgic for something that's right in front of her. The very reason she wants to preserve them is because she's aware of their transience. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's trying to prevent those ceremonies from dying.
Sure, but what's wrong with that? What's wrong with trying to sustain a cultural history?
But documenting something, even archiving and preserving it, it doesn't necessarily preserve the actual thing. It preserves a fraction of it, maybe the thing itself if you're lucky. But meanwhile, the thing being preserved is encased in glass, put on a shelf, separated from the realities of those it's intended to inform. I have an example.
Of course you do.
A tribe in Papua New Guinea wanted the anthropologist Edmund Snow Carpenter to film their sacred and very painful initiation rites for young men. And when it was done, they built a sacred enclosure for the screening of that film, and they gave up the initiation rite.
Well, if it was that painful.
Yes, but it served a purpose in their culture, and the film won't produce the same effect. They didn't preserve the actual practice, and whether they should have isn't even the point. They just retained an image of it. And the boys who watch that film won't understand that image in the same way their fathers and grandfathers understand that image or that experience.
Act 3, how is an archive?
Are you saying we shouldn't save anything? We should just let things slide into oblivion?
I don't know, probably. But I can think of a couple of options.
I like the plan to preserve and catalog the collection deliberately. But what are these options?
Well, you could admit that preservation is an aesthetic choice, perhaps, as well as a cultural, historical, and pragmatic one. Preservationists have changed their minds historically about whether to preserve things as they are or as they should be. Do you restore the painting? Do you fix the leaks in a Frank Lloyd Wright house? Do you repair a torn page if it was torn by George Washington?
Well, I'll admit these are tricky choices. But obviously you would do whatever you can to prolong the life of the object you're archiving so that it's available for future scholars.
Okay, but what about cultural practices like initiation rites? Or, to use a less painful example, traditional modes of, say, folk art. Those skills are only preserved by actually using them, handing them down through the years and making them a part of everyday life. Why not use these objects rather than put them in cases in a museum? Let them live and let them die.
That's what I've been saying from the beginning. Making deliberate choices about what to preserve and how to preserve them, and then let history be the judge of what we got right or wrong. You can choose to archive the work of marginalized communities, or obscure artists, and expand the future understanding of what our culture includes. You said before that those lines are arbitrary, but they're not, insofar as people are actually making them. And the more people who decide to preserve their community's culture and history, the richer our understanding of that culture and history can be.
But you can't escape oblivion.
I'm not denying all that yet. You know, I don't think archives are defensive. I think they are defiant. Choosing a culture to preserve a collection is acknowledging your own finitude and planning for the future without you.
The end. Thank you so much. Please stand up. Jessica Spear and Danielle helping her out. So that question of whether or not a book or a library are a hedge against death or an acknowledgement of finitude is an important one. And as we continue to think about what it means to be an author, a reader, and a library patron, I can think of no one better to lead us on our quest than Ander Monson. Ander joins us tonight from Tucson, where he teaches in the MFA program at the University of Arizona and edits the journal Diagram in the New Michigan Press. He's the author of 6 books of nonfiction, fiction, and poetry, a few of which are available for purchase in the foyer tonight. Neck Deep and Other Predicaments won the Gray Wolf Nonfiction Prize and the Great Lakes Colleges Association's New Writers Award in Nonfiction. Vanishing Point was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism, and Other Electricities won the John C. Zacharias Prize from Plowshares and was a finalist for the New York Public Library Young Lions Award. I could go on and on about Ander's accomplishments tonight, listing prestigious awards and prizes, trumpeting the originality of his immersive and addictive website, noting what other notable authors have noted about his singular talent. But in order to get Ander up here that much sooner, let me focus for just a final moment here on his latest book, Letter to a Future Lover, a work that was just released and the title of which inspired our evening together tonight, which is a very polite way of saying that in letting those words echo anew, I stole them. I'm grateful to my friend Mark Turcott for introducing me to Ander's work. Mark originally told me something like, "You're going to love Ander. He's not only a fantastic writer, but he's right up your alley because he's subversive and anarchic." I took that as a compliment, and boy does Ander deliver on all fronts. The subversion and the anarchy are yet to come tonight, but soon you'll see too just what an incredible writer Ander is. His essays challenge the structure and content of writing, taking up deep philosophical questions concerning what it means to read, to write, to be an author. An Ander Monson essay might suddenly appear in the form of an outline rather than prose. Or an essay might be composed mainly of elliptical periods rather than words. Or an essay may look more like an index, with the content of the ideas buried in alphabetical listings exhuming themselves as we scan the columns. Ander has a particular genius for using the medium of writing to probe the nature of writing. I know of no one writing essays today who can match Ander's innovation, creativity, and talent. Letter to a Future Lover comes in at least 3 different versions, 2 of which are composed of a set of loose 6 by 9-inch cards collected and unbound in a box. Each card contains an essay that was inspired by a book, a visit to a library, a reader, a bit of ephemera or marginalia, or something equally magical from an archive. Ander originally took those cards and published them himself back into the books in the libraries that he visited. That is, he stuck the cards in the books without permission, adding pages for a future reader to read, literally supplementing the text of the book at hand. Thumbing through those reproduced cards, each like an oversized library card, catalog card, speaking to Ander's history, where he's been, what he's read, what he was thinking, one cannot help but want to check out what he was checking out. And we're immediately struck by the way in which these disjointed moments in time still come together to form a grand narrative, much like the banal moments of our lives that add up to a meaningful existence written into the self itself. One of my favorite essays in Ander's new collection is a reflection on a poor book Ander discovered that was checked out from the library only once, nearly 70 years ago. Pierce Butler's Books and Libraries in Wartime, 1945. The date due slip is reprinted there on Anders' index card to card, blank apart from the single stamp notarizing the single time the book was taken out and was singly due. Ander uses the occasion to think about the relationships among books, readers, libraries, violence, and death, concluding, quote, "In this place of preservation, it's not hard to be reminded of those we've lost or fear we might, those who were due but never came. A librarian's conversation, a spine-cracked paperback, a human hair, a whiff of sandalwood in air, each of these might disappear for a year or more and fold the past into the present and pound a nail through the intersection. Patron, in this way, we're young again. We remember. We're alive." Patrons, I am pleased to introduce to you someone whose inspiring and original voice has been long overdue for us, Professor Ander Monson.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks for the puppet show. You know, you sort of evolve rules for, as a reader, things you don't want to follow. One of them is you don't want to follow a poet who memorizes his or her work and doesn't read it from a manuscript, because that's really bad. Number two might be a puppet show. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, and I'm going to read some chunks from the book, kind of as we go. The card that you got, I hope that you got on your way in, is one of the cards that appears only in the limited edition of the book. There's about 98 of them now. I mean, it's a book, but it's also a record of a practice, and which is an ongoing practice for me. So I'm going to read some of them. I'm not going to read that one. That's just a list of some of the things we found in books, arranged, I hope, interestingly. I'll talk about this one here in a minute. But we'll start with a happier place. So all of these are about books and libraries. This is one of my favorite inscriptions. It's in a book of poems by Gary Snyder called Turtle Island, and I found it discarded. So can you read that up there at all? So you can kind of read it. It goes on. There's this 4-page, long, intense inscription to the owner or to the recipient of the book, and the book was discarded. It's this letter to a future lover. Handwritten, it goes without saying. This inscription to an unnamed lover goes on for 3 pages before arriving at a final sorrow at the lover's loss. Today we are with different lovers, but no regrets. Was it ever sent? Was it ever read? One thing is sure, it was inscribed and meant. Such passion cannot be shrugged off until it can. I found the book in Casa de los Niños on Prince and Mountain, thrift shop stuffed with this stuff, the stuffing escaping the chewed-on animals packed in the discount bin. Take 6 for $1. Doll heads are free. They stare at your future, our future, maybe, lover, if we ever come together. Dear future lover, every time it feels like forever when it's new. Bright colors, fabric softener, calliopes that were once terrifying softening into daylight as it fades. You know your lovers surely number more than mine. That's fine, but when I fall, it's ditch whips hitting electric line, the whole world alive and lit in amperes for a moment. And it might be gone again a nanosecond later, the body aching with or for or from the jolt. And perhaps it's fever dream, and who cares where it comes from as long as it's fast and seems like it might last until we're rusting into dust. We are always dying for the future, otherwise it couldn't ever come. That it might split evers seems apart, that it might bring down the lights until forever's in the mirror and the book is given up for thrift. That doesn't matter. Maybe this book was never sent. I can imagine that, an inscription toward the future. Maybe the lover's dead. Maybe the lover's lover's dead. Maybe we are all like those who had their laughs recorded onto laugh tracks for television shows years before, who continue to laugh now, a lifetime, a lifeline, a phone a friend later, disembodied at jokes that were no longer funny. Perhaps they never were. So we're all in wires eventually, reduced to what we said or what we didn't say and what we told or didn't write, who we loved or didn't love, or loved and lost and never told it except writing in or to a book. We are all discarded, discordant, confusingly, and so I salute your bravery, book inscriber. Your heart is big enough for both of us so that there is no room for mockery in me. Anyone willing to strip themselves this bare, this fast, this way, deserves our breathlessness and our heart's attention. Let us spend an hour and then longer in contemplation. If you open, open all the way, or as much as you can bear, or else there's nothing here at all. So the inscription goes on to quote from Duras the lover, then, quote, I cried when I was with you this one time, more than 20 years later. It was the reason for life, and yet I knew it would end. A codex, door, future lover. You can put whatever through it for a reader you imagine coming to your words in a day, a decade, a days of centuries, entries in a future book. Codices have histories. They are leafed, spined, embodied, read by future lovers, I imagine, in bodices, in just this kind of light at night. The future is a mystery lover, a memory, the scent of wisteria coming up from somewhere. Or a codex is a whole through which we might not communicate, but instead be transformed entirely, through which we might descend without notice or equipment and not want or be able to return. So some of these libraries are less traditional libraries. So this is one from the, hold on, let me find it here. There we go. There's one from United Flight 5437, Tucson to Denver, 5:15 a.m., seat 10D, backseat library. Because if you think about it, I mean, it is a kind of library, that backseat pocket. There's a couple things in it. Some of them, sometimes someone leaves something. I always like to leave things for the next person. Some deposits are not meant to be left, really. So this is called Holding Pattern. Not for lending these volumes, Sky West magazine, with a feature strangely on Michigan, Keweenaw Peninsula, my home, whether or not I'd like to claim it. These things claim us, the winter crush, the lack of touch for weeks, a conversationless month, so silent that one late night I sojourned unintentional monk to the Walmart just to catch a human voice. It fell away soon enough, brief drift from the cashier's midnight mouth to the fluorescent hum, then my Chinese junk stowed safely in the car in dolphin throttling plastic sacks, as if the night had meant to say this long silence is a sentence diagrammed for you and for you alone. So this library is small, meant for me alone, the collection limited, the CRJ 700 passenger safety card there to stay, beside the point, as we all know, since all will be is teeth and Great Lake Vapor, maybe the name of a new smokeless cigarette, when we go down in flame and last question death mass. But we kowtow to ritual. We pretend to pay attention just like in school. We got good at that. The darkening, the silence, tuning out this world and tuning into another, like cracking an egg and finding in its place another egg, but this one filled with glowing something special and worthy of our hallowed study, our days counting down in study hall to the end of winter. I study hemispheres from Continental Airlines, randomly on this plane. Crossword only partly done, of course. Number 37 across, a book of maps, 5 letters. They got this one, Atlas. And this map is to an atlas. Here's where we fly you and Continental Airlines, and possibly the hand of God. The clean circular routes to suggest dimension. But for 91, 3 letters, forest female. I think they maybe mean elf? But that's crap. As any reader knows, elves can be male or female. Or perhaps I am chasing the wrong tree, chasing the wrong forest female into greenery from which I will not emerge unscathed. Maybe sylph or dryad, but over-lettered, likely too obscure D&D for this. Fox, instead? Or the vixen version, map tracks of male and female crisscrossing X's in snow? Well, for number 43 across, 4 letters for excited, good news, they got it. It's a gog, but that was the end of it. There are a few bits missing. Piece of map torn out as perhaps a scrap of paper or to house gum past pulverized and geocached for another finder. Knowing that we're allowed to take the magazines home, I do, but the safety information card's the real prize. I stole dozens from my collections in years past, pleased with the iconography, the odd illustration decisions, I envisioned later planes going down, the crowd, once bored, now scrapping for a card, a crutch, a written revelation to clutch into the blur of their final moments and finding nothing. Traveling alone, do you choose another's heart to hold? Does it matter whose? Is it the one who most looks like the one you love? The one you had eyes for on this flight, even if these flirtatious semaphores never crest, because where is there to go? 2 barf bags, one unmarked, the other for motion discomfort and baby diaper disposal, for deposit either way. No need to return. I fill mine with snacks, and I put it back, a surprise for someone sore-backed, weary or weepy. I write mash notes to the future on napkins, on planes and in airports, and leave them for another future lover. An anonymous space makes us bold. We can hold so few, and only briefly. So this is, there's a series of these essays that are written to this guy. So one of the things that I found was that, that book has offensive markings, thing that I started with, was there's this guy in the university, I teach in the University of Arizona, and there's this guy who defaced at least 300 books over the course of the last 10 years. Which is a lot of books, for starters. But he wouldn't just deface them, he would deface, this book is about 500 pages, he would deface 350 pages of this book. He really would go to town. And I found one of them on the shelf, and I was really fascinated by it. Both by the sort of desire to deface it at all. A library book in particular, that's heresy. But then this is the gay and lesbian biography that he's defaced. And the thing that I found was really fascinating about it is in his raging against the machine of whatever, he starts to reveal things that he's not intending to reveal, I'm sure. And this is one, he's got a bit where he doesn't understand that Oscar Wilde was gay. He's extremely upset that Greta Garbo might be gay, as you can see. He's got some issues with spelling and with punctuation also. So this is from the Gay and Lesbian biography. This is so I wrote a series of these essays to the defacer. In truth, I too defaced books surely, furiously, variously, before I understood their worth, but also walls, homes, computer systems, above-ground pools, school buses, schools, school desks and lockers, bathroom stalls, urinals, garage doors, a bus station, car glass, cars, glass block windows, wine glasses at parties, and Mr. Millenbach's shed. The list is embarrassing, but I need to say it. My name or my words are carved in or written all over in margins of all sorts, on borrowed sports equipment, even in the evening. Was this an evening out of anything, restoring a sense of balance, of scoring, of settling? Was it about power? Feeling my breath, my reach, effect linked to cause, a pausing of the world in order to press myself into it, adolescent, and leave it marked? Dear defacer, this is a book about the margin, so while the librarian surely won't, I welcome your marginalia, partially because it starts to arc, suggest your story, your growing worry about gender and sex. It starts in stutter, bitch-assery, a variety of slurs, faggot this, lesbo that, a yawn, you burring anything and anyone you can, pathological and uncontrolled. But 100 pages later, your shriek against how easy it must be to come out when you're rich betrays a shadow self. The pool's shallow end is not so shallow as it seems, or else you're drowning there regardless. They say it only takes an inch. On a later page, your confession of your age, he's in his 60s, as he confesses in here, makes the accent weirder. Then, should I really be aware that Oscar Wilde, which he misspells, is queer or was? Yes, you should. If you're in your 60s, if you've ever read anything. Quote, if I'd ever known Oscar Wilde was a faggot, why the fuck does someone have to tell me after 100 fucking years? He doesn't have an I in fucking. Quote, unquote. You may have noticed we're in the gay and lesbian biography. Why else were you here? So I'm not sure it's fair to pair the two of us, defacer. 16 is life away from 66, but still I want to understand your small, weird heart. Our anger suggests our sadness, that the sum of us in misdirected screeds is greater than the part. Don't we all wear our faces loosely? Is it sad to say our eyes are masks? Garbo's face a mask. Emily Dickinson's, as you complain. Wilde's, Ma Bell's, you note randomly, though you know she's even less real than the rest of these. Your face a mask. My face a mask. This book a mask. Your marks in it masks. Each mask a mask. These sentences a mask. Red Death, a self-photographed macaque, a walk through the history of our error-prone approach to sex, desire, to gender, to fashion, or to film. These things are kilns in which we bake the masks of self anew. These things are stones upon which we are asked to dash each mask each evening in order to keep breathing. So this is a little sadder one. Actually, I mean, you can't write a book about libraries without it being somehow sad. It's not only sad, but it's a little sad. So I'm going to read this one. This is from a handwritten sympathy card, and I'm going to read the whole citation from the library. It's from the Tucson Public Library, the Ekstrom Columbus branch. And it's from a handmade sympathy card that was written to Gabrielle Giffords, my congresswoman who was shot by Jared Lee Loughner, who also shot a whole bunch of other people in a Safeway in Tucson, as you may have heard, a few years back. And so this was part of the card sort of sent in sympathy to the victims of the tragedy. And it's filed under, and I found this interesting, handwritten sympathy card filed under Collective Memory, United States, Bereavement, Death, Social Aspects, Mourning Customs, United States, Memorialization, Memory, Giffords Gabriel D., 1970 assassination, they misspell assassination, attempt, 2011, condolence notes, Tucson, Arizona. I mean, you're obliged, obviously, to have to sort of find a way to subcategorize and find the right subjects, but I just found that to be a really strange collection of things. So here's a question. Can a library collect or catalog pain? Some try. Often memorials by name. This one's named for Dan Ekstrom, who is still alive. Many hold a sorrow story, someone's lost to pass, and now just the branch's name. But I came here for the gallery. The January 8th exhibit features sympathy notes, cards, and posters from the 2011 shooting of my congresswoman, Gabrielle Giffords, and many others at a Safeway not far away from here. After the blood faded and the temporary memorial material was collected at the hospital, the Arizona Memory Project archived and cataloged what notes and cards and signs they could. Today, they are displayed, not the pain itself, but the evidentiary bruise, each note and outline of the strike, a wet echo spreading, gas expanding from an extinguished star. From the fragment, we intuit what was here before. So mostly these notes are from kids. It's hard not to be moved. Many are addressed to Christina Taylor Green, born September 11th, 2001, died 1/8/11. She too was killed on that day 3 years ago. Since then, her life would have expanded by a third. We are made up of mostly water, as they say. Most libraries archive words, our better parts, but one library holds only water. Iceland's Library of Water offers 24 volumes, each a melt, an archive of a separate glacier or its future state. There too find silence and a sense of dwindling, or maybe it's renewing. You may pass through but borrow only in the sense of memory. We might think all water is for lending. All we do is hold it a while and then release. Bloomfield, who wrote this, tells us pain is water, but that it will not wash away. At best, by talk, it can be transmuted into sorrow. An archive is a kind of talk, waiting for an answer. Unrelated, I presume, a sign on a meeting window advertises widow-widower meeting, happening right now. Widow, meet widower. Widower, meet widow. Let's look at the window together and remember there is something beyond this room. Here we are all wrecked. We're all wet. Here we're all lonely, learning again how to live. We know we must forget to progress or move past, but we don't know what, how much, how often, or how to let go of anything at all. How do we release, and when does it cease? I think I'm going to skip this one. It's a pretty good one. Here's Emily Dickinson now. And there's a whole bunch of them. I mean, again, I found his handwriting kind of interesting. But you're like, okay. I'm not sure he's ever read Emily Dickinson also. So dear Defacer, like Emily, you too seem to love the dash. You can see his little dash at the top. I was wondering if he was somehow like trying to use that. But even if you don't deploy it well, your diminutive for her is unwarranted too. What sounds your heart made inside of a room, reading her for instance. I wonder, have you ever really read her, or do you just know the name? And if you'd read her, what did you think of her work, and not just her countenance, how you perceived her sex, or orientation toward or away from you? The world doesn't care for you as much as you seem to care for it. I hate to tell you this, even if it hurts your twit heart a little bit, but how you write suggests you know. So, do you think your word's a signal, like shortwave radio, a microphone you speak into every night, even if you rarely are acknowledged? Is your speech a confession to the world, or interrogation of it? In the way nights in Tucson, a dark city, meaning streetlights are restricted, meaning porch lights are restricted, meaning night here is darker than any place you've ever known, all for the astronomers who work an hour or so away in places like Kitt Peak or atop Mount Lemmon, somewhat closer to the stars, and a bit beyond the city light leak haze that takes place in spite of our attempts to curtail the way we spread. And so the night is bigger, wider, deeper, more of it to speak your little heart into, to fire your anger into like a signal. Instead of books, you might try this: a microphone, a call sign, a homemade kit. It doesn't take much to get yourself heard, if that's what you're wanting here, if that's what you're waiting for. Dickinson, of course, projected far beyond her home, in spite of her seclusion, and is still radiating out toward stars. Sad to say, it feels unthinkable in the American internet reality now, not to court the light, in fact, to shy away from it, but still to make such work, such words as hers, which it's a shame to even try to compare to yours, or to parse formally in this way a minor karaoke of the mouth and heart. Maybe instead we should sing the battle hymn of the Republic as performed by the band Warrant. It's easy to forget them, cock rockers, middle of the pack at best, but still how sometimes she cries, which I'm listening to at the moment, exemplar of the confusing era of the power ballad, released in 1990, near the end of that rock era, and the lead singer's really bad hat in the video. His stage name was Janie Lane. His birth name was John Kennedy Oswald. An awful combination. A signal of unapproachability or unlocatability, perhaps. His given name, his stage name, his hat. Yeah, he died in 2011 of alcohol poisoning after failing to revive an alternate version of Warrant at 47, which leads me to an honor of Dickinson, of Janie Lane, in honor of you, anonymous defacer, and of you, readers, to cue this up for karaoke next Friday night at the Royal Sun Best Western, and every Friday night after that, until all the lights go dark and or the stars go out. So you may recognize this. I don't know if your library here ever used these punch cards. I find them actually really fascinating. A lot of the University of Arizona use this. Did I just turn the lights way up on myself? Yeah. What happened? It's in the computer?
It is in the computer. Sorry. It is.
I don't know if I thought I was just freaking myself out there. Did I touch something? I swear.
You're fine. You're fine. They're out to get you.
It's not my fault. That's not the anarchy we promised. This is called Dear Future Lover. I'm just not going to touch anything here. And this is from the University of Arizona Science and Engineering Library, and it's from a book called Recreation Special Populations. And I mean, one thing that I sort of ended up doing with this book and sort of ran into questions about was that occasionally I would just take something from the library. Small things, I mean, not books, but like this, like the master book card. Do not lose, it tells you. But I mean, it's not a functioning thing at any point now. I mean, it's still in the book. They don't use this anymore. In Arizona, we've advanced past this in the last year or two. But I would always take these, but then I started taking other things too. So, which is why no one trusts me around their stuff anymore, I guess. Dear future lover, here's a relic for the reliquary and another artifact of the past. Go ahead, take it, collect it, chuck it. It doesn't serve its former function anymore. But the question is it part of the archive? Is it still the property of the library? I find them with regularity in academic libraries in the science and engineering sections, in books that may themselves be obsolete or just past their sell-by date, like the above, which is from 1977. Still, for nearly 2 centuries, these cards have served. I put them in a box with the gears I found in the wreckage of the burned-down barn when I was young. Printed cards seem an odd choice for a technology to be computer-read. These days, we think of one as the other's foe: electronic book and printed book, electronic journal and printed journal, digital and photograph, the 18th century's chess-playing automaton, the mechanical Turk, which defeated both Napoleon and Ben Franklin in games of chess, and Amazon's Turk, a marketplace for work, as they say. But it wasn't always so. Before magnetic storage, the punch card was the preferred medium for the digital. Now a card functions only as a screen. Place it over text to see which letters its holes reveal, a few lit rooms in a building at night seen from the street, featuring an indifferent woman removing clothes and draping them across a chair. All technologies are just a screen. You either look at what's behind the tech, what it reveals, how the world is edited down in this way to these few openings, this is what a window is good for, or you illuminate the surface you are looking through and give it your attention. Jacquard looms used punch cards as far back as 1810 to control the weaving pattern, and these cards are still used by a few today, in Amana, Iowa, for instance, though they didn't become instructions for machines we call computers until the 50s. Still, the rhetoric is shrill. Do not lose. How close are we to losing it? Neck sunk in now, and the urge for more of that now. New gadgetry, technology, efficiency. Awesome. I like all of these, of course, but the edge advances. Soon what we cherished a decade back may be unreadable. Try to find a drive to read your floppy disks. Burned CDs last less than a decade. Then there's the glory of the cloud until it storms and lightning spikes the server or the user, or you're away from Wi-Fi. Sad half an iPhone I found on the curb while walking with my wife. Once you too were new and promised much, and now you're metallic mulch. We notice that our new machines, ultralight laptops reading and uploading data to our servers, work like our old machines, terminals reading and uploading data to our servers. In between, we had a little burst of self-sufficiency. So maybe we should savor the technologies we do have, thumb their ergonomic surfaces, their lovely screens, the paper weave as you turn a page. Take pleasure in how they operate, the smooth dials of the stereos I grew up with, how much better than the sort of like plastic clicking thing. The craggy surfaces of the essay, which is a technology thinking and artificial intelligence, or the hush of a good pencil along a white sheet, or my stenographer's pad, and not acknowledging its anagram, reads steno/notes. I love this particular stenography pad for this reason. Someone's like little bit, they realize the steno and notes are anagrams, and they put it there, and it makes me very happy. And my book, I would add, still reads fine in the bath, in the sun, not plugged in. So consider the aperture card, a punch card with a sheet of microfilm inset, a fuse of analog and digital. Created in 1943 by Film and File, it still persists. A 2004 white paper reports that 35mm aperture cards are very much alive. They continue to have a storage shelf life of over 100 years, where magnetic CD-ROM and other digital storage media have a maximum shelf life of 7 to 25 years. Since we're so poor at reckoning with what comes next, it might be best to hedge our bets. A phrase is a technology too. This one persists from the 16th century, in which one hedged one's land to secure it, to limit risk, and not to bet the hedge and the land entire. So this one, I'm just going to show you the image. You can read the book. You can read the essay elsewhere. This is a library, an ad hoc library that I just found just on the side of a sidewalk. But there's 4 books. They're all in a genre. Someone clearly left them there. These aren't just like thrown away. They're like there for someone. And I found them fascinating. One of them is 1-900 Lover, which is a really stupid title, because 1-900, you're short a couple digits of being able to dial 1-900 Lover. So at least get your soft porn to have verisimilitude. Okay, here's something I stole. I'm going to do 2 more of these. This is called Your Words Here. It's from Mary Ellis Ames' book called Balanced Recipes, which is from the Kansas State University's Special Collections. And it's encased in this like phenomenal steel binding. And it's really cool. However, I did steal this page from Special Collections. Sorry, Special Collections. I do thank the librarian in the book. So your words go here. Are you getting the idea I must like theft? It's true I stole this page from Special Collections. If I held the library sacrosanct, I wouldn't touch it, use it, brush my hands along a page, slowly eroding or decomposing it. To use a book is to destroy it. It's okay to treat technology this way. That's what makes it good, precious, worthy of collection. I choose instead to see the library as a vessel, a tool, a place for fools to query reference librarians with their lazy questions that they could have Googled yes. But more than that, it's an opportunity for avatar, a home for budding atavists, just rediscovering the smell and feel of books, so old school sensory, like the Boston Medical Dispensary, which, quote, afforded the means of relief to many necessitous persons, among others whose feelings would have been hurt by an application for assistance from the almshouse. So this page itself doesn't have much smell. Balanced Recipes, which is not quite the first Pillsbury cookbook, but an early one, published in 1933, sold to Pillsbury customers for $1.25, bound in an aluminum shell so as to protect it from the elements of cookery in the kitchen. It includes a set of extra sheets for the reader's recipe or notes. Ring-bound, it was meant for use, not preservation. It's meant to be interactive. Still, Kansas State University Library has preserved it, where it lodges in their special collections, which specializes awesomely. And if you're ever in Manhattan, Kansas, the Little Apple, as they call it, you should really go check out their cookbook collection, because it's a really cool special collections. You can apologize to their librarian for me. But KSU, of course, is the Ag and Land Grant School of Kansas. So the librarian was pleased to show me some of the weirdest items in their collection. 90s rapper Coolio. You guys remember Coolio? He's got a cookbook that came out in 2009 called Cooking with Coolio. And if you've never checked out his YouTube series, he's got like a show on YouTube, which is just like, it's actually really pretty good. It's just him like cooking various things. They're like really kind of trashy things, but he cooks them in an okay way. And they beat up a white dude at some point randomly in one of them. It's great. You should go check that out tonight, if nothing else. So you should click and awe his YouTube series. He can cook and he is funny. Then there's this lovely metal-bound piece of history. And there's a stranger recent text called Cooking with Cum. I'll pause here for your disgust. It's an actual cookbook of how to cook with cum. I was going to get it for a friend of mine, actually. This is not in the essay. But I was going to get it for a friend of mine, but I thought that I couldn't really go over to his house for a meal ever again. So I'm really asking for it. Indecorous to write about or think about, still it's an entry in the category, and thus deserving of collection. Animal product that it is, why should it provoke the cringe response when paired with cooking? Is it because it comes from us? So yes, I stole a sheet from now dead as of 1968 Mary Ellis Ames. Please don't think less of me, or if you do, at least do it with panache. If you're a librarian of a certain stripe, I'm sure your eyebrow is raised already, but sheets are blank. They're here for you, they're here for me, and they're here for us. I just partook what was offered to me. To do less would be to disrespect the book. If I could reinsert this text, I would. As you know, I publish these back into the books when possible. As long as pages remain, you get the point. This book was meant for your hands, your handiwork, your handwriting, your hand-wringing over how much butter, lard, or whatever other animal product is wise, okay, too gross for words, or best to cook with or eat, according to whatever study has just been published on the subject. This book asks you to interact. It's open source and open binding. It wants you to buy more Pillsbury's Best flour and bake with it, marvel at it, and mean it. Mary Ellis Ames was director of Pillsbury's cooking service, and she existed. She wrote this book. She left these blank pages in the back for you. She was no faux, no crock, no fabricated brand like Betty Crocker, who was developed by the Washburn Crosby Company in 1921 as a more intimate signatory to respond to baking questions. Fake heart. Crocker's signature was that of a company secretary who won the contest. She was played by 13 different radio actresses, given a portrait in 1936 which was a composite of 4 different women. An avatar, a shell, having no life proper, she still lives and gives advice. Since then, her portrait has changed 7 times. Strange, these worlds inside names. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to read for you tonight. This is called For an Elephant Historian. So, and this is from the Circus World Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin. Has anyone been to the Circus World Museum? It's really great. If you're ever up by Baraboo, they also have a pretty good disc golf course, incidentally, which was kind of why I was there. But I've always wanted to go to the museum. And of course, they have a library. And this is a book called Ringling Elephant History from that library. So you should stop in. It's really a really amazing library. It's called For an Elephant Historian. And this is by Cebu, as you can see, who went by Cebu, Elephant Historian. Sadness is your lot. There is a lot of it. You remember since someone should. The elephants do not all of them, regardless of their reputation. Since they cannot speak in frequencies we are prepared to hear, you wrote down their names. Icky, Lucy, Siam, Marcella, Jenny, Roma, Rainey, Betty, Susan, and India, where they were kept in Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey stock car number 130 in 1976. Their ages and their provenances, what they were made to do, how long they lived, how and when they died. So no one called you by your given name, Raymond Moreau. Instead, you chose Cebu, Hindi for elephant. Behind a name like this, it's easy to disappear. Many Cebus exist. It's hard to believe you didn't understand your naming would be your erasure, that you would disappear into your role. Unlike the magician, a historian's work is to reverse a disappearance, to chronicle, enshrine, to collect, to save. Perhaps to do it well, we must disappear. So I met you here in the manuscript of Ringling Elephant History, the book you worked on up until your death. It was never published by a press, but it has not disappeared. A little edifice, it still stands on the back shelf of the Robert Parkinson Library, a branch of the Circus World Museum in Baraboo, the former world headquarters and winter home of Ringling Brothers Circus before it merged with Barnum and Bailey and departed for the East. So it's Sunday, and if you were alive, you'd be working the Sunday show. If you weren't, you could spend the day watching padded giants collide on screen, or like me, you could read story after story of elephant deaths, many of them executions, if you can call them that. The newspapers read, "Bad elephant killed, killer elephant destroyed. Alice, the only elephant in modern times to calf in the United States, was executed at the Hogle Garden Zoo in Chicago because she had become ill-tempered." Or Albert, a very large and treacherous Asiatic elephant, was sentenced to death. Or Tip the elephant, finally deemed bad, was publicly poisoned. We might note a whiff of the rhetoric of lynching if we're paying attention. Unfortunately, an elephant story is a story of cruelty. To be the largest land animal is to be tormented for your size, to be hit by a train, to escape and to be mutilated, to be burned, beaten, poisoned, starved, shot, imprisoned, blown up, strangled, and electrocuted, on camera no less, by Edison no less, as part of his public quest to discredit alternating current. To be this big is to be used as an instrument of execution too, and an instrument of war. Then there were also better days, I'm sure. I look out the window into the darkness and wonder just how deep it goes. So Cebu, for you the world was surely hard. The life you were born into took you far on train tracks, a set of lashes crisscrossing the continent and overseas into a world you were paid to entertain. You knew entertainment has its costs. The least we can do, your example says, is keep accounts. But we can't account for everything. It's a miracle we hold on to anything at all. Here you're filed under KAANEL miscellaneous in an idiosyncratic and sometimes impenetrable cataloging system created by founding librarian Robert Parkinson, for whom the library is named, as the archivist explains. His cataloging rules have disappeared, but the archivist keeps discovering pointers to them the deeper he goes into the collection, and when he does, he adds them to a file. We have only recently understood a great deal of elephant language occurs in a range below our capacity for hearing, between 1 and 20 hertz. These calls can travel for long distances and often mean, "I am here, where are you?" Cebu, obscure, is far from disappeared. Like Dusty, Mustard, John in Peru, you are here. Through these years, I hear you. Thank you.
Anders agreed to take some questions, and I'm going to ask you, please, to stay with us for this, because we're going to take just a short chunk of time, and then we're going to do something special as a group, too. So I'm going to bring the lights up here. And there is a microphone there in the center, and Anna's turned the power on for it. So if you want to ask a question, please go to the center so that everybody can hear you.
Thanks. We can talk about whatever you guys want, by the way. It doesn't just have to be elephant death, which is cheery. We can talk about warrant. You should probably go watch that video on YouTube along with the Coolio while you're at it. Excellent, a question. Someone needed to do it, right?
I'm not sure I need this microphone back, but I'm wondering what you make of the Kindle edition of this book.
Have you looked at it yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah. So there is an ebook version of the book. As Peter mentioned, there's 3 separate editions, and actually there's 4 if you include the ebook. Each of them has a different table of contents. The essays are slightly different in each of them. Obviously I didn't really want to do an ebook version of this, because the whole book is about, you should like go read a book, y'all. You don't need don't download it. Go to the library, or just go interface with the technology of the book that's been around and we still like, and it's great. But my editor really wanted to do it, so I said, okay, I have no problem at all with that. But if we're going to do an ebook, it has to include something that the regular book can't do. And so like ebooks, I'm not opposed to ebooks, but I mean, they're just not in opposition to regular books. Like they're not the same thing at all. They're completely different in kind of how they operate and how we interface with them. And I like my ebooks because you can search. That's awesome, especially as a teacher. It's nice to be able to search for stuff. And I can have 20,000 of them on my phone, which is nice. But so what we did is we decided that the ebook, first of all, it has an extra essay in it, which is addressed only to the ebook readers, and is kind of mocking them for buying the ebook. It's still a pretty good essay, and it talks about this really interesting book, which some of you may know, but it's kind of apocryphal now, but it's William Gibson's weird project, Agrippa, which is an edition. It's like a really small edition. It's like this beautiful, it's Agrippa, a Book of the Dead. There's only 4, I think, in libraries anywhere, and it's this giant like hardcover book with this art book project, and inside it there's a floppy disk. And inside the floppy disk, you can click something on the floppy disk, and it reads a poem to you, and then it encrypts and erases itself. So it can only be read once, which is kind of a sort of extreme idea about like what this is. But of course, what happened was he premiered it at one of the he premiered it publicly at some point, and of course someone videotaped the premiere. So hackers immediately got it online, the text of it online, which in a way is a real plus, because otherwise people wouldn't be able to read this poem that he wrote. I mean, it's really designed, it just disappears. But then they put it online, and I think it's a really interesting story, and I wish I could make a book that was like that, but Amazon doesn't let you do that. Although in a way, if you're buying all your books on the Amazon Kindle, when you stop subscribing to the Kindle, when Amazon kind of blows up, all those are gone. I'll still have my book and I'll be hanging out. So we did that. We had that essay, and then we had, the one thing I don't like, that I loved about the limited editions, was it's supposed to be read in whatever order you want. All books are interactive to begin with, but this book is designed to be like super interactive. Like, I wanted people to be able to take a page and just, what you can do is put it in a book. There's a couple blank ones that are meant for you to write in. Like your invitation is, you're being given your invitation with a book. You don't need an invitation. You can still write in a book anyway. But there's blank pages here asking for you. But what we did with the ebook that you can't do. I know that 95% of readers are just going to read this starting with page 1 and go to page 170, because we're lazy and we're very well trained on how to read books. Like, we're very well trained. We know we start at the beginning and we go to the end, and we feel guilty when we don't, and we should, I suppose. But the ebook allows you can kind of scroll through whatever you want, but then you can also click through. There's 2 ways to read it. So it's got like a special itinerary you can take through it. That'll give you a really different reading experience. Or you can just read it alphabetically if you want. And there's like a couple things. There's a couple like Easter eggs in it too. So I felt like if we're going to do it, then we need to do it up in a way that takes advantage of the possibilities of the form and isn't just we dump the PDF on the internet or whatever, which is my fear and what I hate about ebooks. More of them need to be a little bit more thoughtful about the medium, and then I'll respect them. You guys have other questions?
I'll ask a question. I'm curious because all of your examples of things that you find in libraries, they're all mainly text-based as well. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the people you found in libraries? I guess I'm specifically thinking about librarians, especially with the practice of taking things out of books, but I'm kind of interested in the people and who's in libraries and why are they working there?
Well, it's actually interesting because I talked to very few librarians explicitly as part of this book. I spent a lot of time kind of shadowing / stalking them and kind of listening to what they said. And so there's conversations that appear in a couple places in here. There's a number of conversations, between random library patrons, undergrads oftentimes, who use the library as a shelter and a place to go to get away from the cold, rather than a place to actually go to read books, a place with free Wi-Fi. So there's lots of overheard conversations, and the whole book is sort of designed to be a conversation with you or with whoever finds the card that I put in the book in whatever 1,000 years or never does. So it's about conversations, but there aren't really that many living people that are sort of talked to in the book, which is I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine. We're talking about photography, and I was looking at some of her photographs, and the things that really appealed to me were the abstract shots, never the ones with people in them. And she only liked the ones with the people. But I didn't. I'm interested in people, but I guess I'm interested in talking to them once they're frozen on the page and have been maybe ignored for 50 to 60 years and not checked out. So but what has happened though, since I wrote the book, and I sent copies of the manuscript to a bunch of librarians. I have a lot of friends who are librarians. And I've talked with, one of the things I love about this book in particular is as soon as I give a reading from it, I always talk to someone afterwards who's just got something awesome they have to tell me, or something really cool that they found, or some book that I need to check out. Check out meaning you actually go to a library or just buy or whatever. So it's been a kind of nexus for that kind of conversation. But it's not, there's not a ton of librarians in here, or explicit librarians, I should say, who are talked to. I should say I also tried to track down the defacer, but they refused. He was never arrested. They caught him, but they didn't catch him on video defacing. So therefore the police did not press charges, and therefore the library couldn't release his name to me. But I'm still really curious about him. I'm sure he probably wouldn't want to talk to me, but I would have loved to have that opportunity. But that's an interesting kind of, not exactly an oversight, but a statement maybe of my interest in the book. Maybe it's not too late though, I hope, for all of us.
So, I'm a historian, and that means I spent a lot of time in archives and libraries, not just here, but in Russia, the Russian history. And I wrote about an elephant who was executed in Odessa in 1914. Ran across one of those banner headlines, "Elephant Sentenced to Death," which was an interesting moment of reflection. But really what I wanted to ask you about was whether you, in your wanderings, spent any time in children's sections or in these new sort of teen loft spaces that exist in libraries, and whether you're doing any observation of kind of interactions that younger people are having with books, in a world where they're surrounded by things that are electronic. It strikes me, at least in my own observations, that there's a lot of tactile, just sensuality, that is being written onto the relationship with a physical object. And I just wonder.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff to talk about. One is I went to, there's a really interesting library, the KGB prison library in Lithuania, in Vilnius, that I visited, which was the library for books for prisoners, many of whom were executed. Which they didn't let me in to the library, but I sort of got to speculate about it. And it's a really messed up library for obvious reasons. But it is interesting to think about I mean, to think about the way that people interact with books. And one thing that people have been smarter about in the last, say, 20, 30 years, I mean, is sort of figuring out, like, especially with kids, like, you know, the sort of progressive kids museums have become so much more interesting and vivid. And there's actually this guy whose name is not going to come to mind that I was just looking at, and he started making animal lending libraries, small animal lending libraries, which were kind of just a step away from a children's museum, where the idea would be, you know, kids could come in and pet a skunk. Because what he said was, like, you know, if kids get their hands on a living thing, you automatically get an emotional response. Unlike perhaps a book, although I think books are actually rather erotic and very sensual if they're done right. I mean, crappy books maybe aren't going to be, but really beautiful books are, and it's a very personal kind of interaction that you have with a book. Partially, and it's also, I mean, I got really excited by finding people left there, human hairs and so on. But it's hard to know. I mean, I don't want to fetishize the library as just a museum of old, cool stuff, because the library has to be a lot more than that. I mean, especially public libraries. I mean, academic libraries can sort of afford to, I think, kind of archive more and chuck less. But public libraries, I went to one in Gilbert, Arizona, which was they gave up on Dewey, which is a little surprising for a public library. Instead, they decided they were going to just outfit it like a Barnes and Noble, because that's what the kids understood. And I found that to be a sort of questionable thing, because Barnes and Noble doesn't seem like the most forward-thinking. Like, the bookstore may not be the model that we want to go by, at least the Barnes and Noble bookstore. I mean, maybe the indie bookstore, which has like so much more kind of subjectivity, and it's designed to be a meeting space. But it was interesting being there just because, of course, I went to like the literature section, and there was 37 books total. I mean, there was like 250 in the manga. And I'm not opposed to manga, but I was really saddened by the fact there was like 37 in literature. And of course, no one was there. There's a bunch of kids in manga, and they were going crazy. They were like having a really nice time. So I picked them up and I cataloged them, and I figured which ones they were. I mean, maybe the rest of the literature was all checked out. Like, that was my hope. Like, the other 20,000 were circulating in Gilbert, Arizona. But I'm pretty sure they weren't. And I don't mean to sort of say that libraries should, no, we need to like have all the dead people here on the shelves, no matter what people want, for the good of them. I mean, librarians are living things as are libraries, and so you of course want to be able to speak to the needs of people. And there's one that I read about, which in San Antonio, Texas, the first library without any books at all. And Tucson actually tried to do that too. They tried to do this about 10 years ago, but people like freaked out. Like, you can't get rid of books. I mean, never mind that they didn't, want to pay for the library or didn't go to the library. It's the idea of a library without books horrified them. But I mean, the one in San Antonio has been really successful in that, I mean, it offers internet access, and especially public libraries that offer meeting spaces, they offer shelter, they offer like opportunities for access to databases. There's all kinds of other stuff. Internet use is like one of the big ones. So they're doing other things too. And unlike Nicholas and Baker, who I generally agree with, and I generally love Nicholas and Baker, and I love his book, Doublefold, I mean, sometimes the desire to kind of catalog and keep everything, I mean, that gets in the way of a living thing continuing to live and continuing to like speak to and inculcate, reading habits and intimate experiences that people have with books. And I guess that like I'm sort of hopeful that we're smart enough. What we ought to do, if we want to get kids to really read, we ought to just tell them they should not read. Reading is terrible for you. It's going to rot your brain. Like, you can only do it for 15 minutes a day, and you can bank that like over the course of a week, as my friends do with their kids, like iPad time. Because at least for me, I would have been like, well, shit, I got to get in some libraries and start checking out some books. But I think that, and this is something like the ebook is not going to encourage any kind of excitement, I think, with kids with books. Unless it's like the Elements one, like the app, like book is app that has like video and it's interactive. That's pretty cool. Like, I can see that, but the ebook is not sexy. The MP3 is honestly not sexy either. There's a reason why everyone's buying vinyl again. Well, not everyone, but those who are buying anything are buying vinyl because like you want a social, intimate experience with an artifact. So I think that's not going to go away, but I do wonder. I will say kids' books are like really awesome now. And there's so many of them, they're so amazing, and they're so like, pop-ups, and you get to see kids like playing with it. And I've really enjoyed that. So I'm kind of rambling in response to your question in hopes of an answer. But instead, you just got to ramble. You guys have any more questions? Yes?
Have you been banned from any libraries since your book came out, or are they watching you more closely?
Well, this book was going to be used as a book club book for a library. And then I got an email from one of the librarians who's like, ooh, too many discussions of stealing things from libraries. And they felt that their clientele, the people that came to book club, would be really put off by that. So they deleted me from their list, which is fine. I mean, it's not like banning my book or anything. But I guess I would hope, I think there's a trade-off between, like, I'm liberating stuff for art. Like, and I believe that. Like, I'm also liberating stuff because I kind of like doing that. But I'm taking it for art. I'm taking it because, like, I can pay a kind of attention to it in this book. Like that Mary Ellis Ames thing. Like, what are the chances that you were ever going to go see one of those little cards, or one of those little, like, the slips of paper from that book? You're not going to. Unless you really take this reading seriously. I'm like, well, I got to go to Kansas State to go check that out. Whereas, like, now it gets a sort of moment, and it gets talked about, and it's like, I guess I feel that, like, books like that are being, they're asking us to do something with them. Like, if you don't want to have any kind of, like, experience that degrades a book, then you should read ebooks, and they'll stay beautiful forever, free of your imperfections, free of your marginalia, free of any trace that a human ever came in contact with this crappy text. But what I want is I want the grease. I want the fingerprints on the margins. I want to be able to see my own stupid marginalia that I wrote, like when I didn't understand Gatsby at like 14. And then to be able to kind of reread it in that sense. But for the most part, these are pretty nerf insurrections that I detail in here. Like, I'm not, like, liberating laptops or doing anything like that. So mostly people have been indulgent. Or just like, although I did a reading from some of my work at a place that had like a really big divinity school, and they really loved it. They felt that I think they just kind of wanted to sort of save me, but they felt that it's a kind of, like, it's a sort of religious attention that I'm paying to a thing that I hope justifies whatever small sins I may have committed in accumulating all this stuff. And I give books to libraries, and I like libraries. Maybe if they see someone to go to a library, that'll be great. Cool? All right, then we have one more assignment for you.
We do. We have an assignment. First, just a couple of quick announcements. Remember that you can get actual physical copies of Anders' book outside at our Barnes & Noble's. Barnes & Noble's rep is selling. Also, at the Humanities Center, we're going to continue this series. And 3 weeks from now, we're going to be having a whole night talking about banned books and the history of American public libraries as well. So we're going to keep going. And that night, we're going to pass out banned books to people in the audience. But tonight, what we want to do, because I don't know about you, I was inspired by Ander, everything he writes, and we're inspired and honored to have him here. So what we want to do is we want to have an Ander Monson moment. So going around here, being passed out are blank index cards, sort of the same variety that Ander has used to self-publish his thoughts and books. And they're also coming along with a little bit of a prompt that Ander has written for us. And so here's what we're going to do. It's a kind of twofold thing, and I hope you'll stick with us. We're going to take 5 minutes here for you to look at the prompt and think a little bit about it and write something on the index card. And then, in 5 minutes, we're going to go over to the library here at DePaul, and I want to encourage everybody to go up into the stacks and to find a book and to publish the card that you're writing right now in that book. Leave it there for somebody in the future. You can write whatever you'd like on the index card. Please feel free to. But Andrew's been so nice as to give us these prompts. And then the second thing we're going to do, and this won't take very long, so I hope you'll be able to stick with us, is that when you're over in the library, if you do have a DePaul library card, a DePaul ID, we're going to ask you to check out a book. It's not even really important what it is, although hopefully it's a book that you think is interesting or hasn't been checked out in a while. And go down and check it out. And hopefully we're going to have a line there at the library of people checking out books. It's going to be the Monson spike in the data. They're going to say what happened, that 100 people checked out a book all at the same time that night. And we're going to change the Richardson Library forever here. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to write a little something down. And then we're going to go over as a group, and the evening's going to continue there. Okay? Thanks so much for being with us.